All right, let's get started. So thank you all again for joining this session, as many of you have done with the previous sessions as well. Highly appreciated. Hopefully you don't know too much about Ephemeral OS Disks, because that's going to be the main topic of this session today, of course. Short-lived, that's what you'll find if you look for ephemeral and what it means. Short-lived also tells something about the main use case within WVD, of course, which we'll go into a bit more detail in throughout the session as well. First, just short on myself. My name is Bas van Kaam. I'm the EMEA field CTO for Nerdio, joined back in 2020 around June, and I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations within the EMEA region, you could say. So if you would like to get in contact, pick your poison. And after the presentation tomorrow, next week, whatever the case may be, and let me know what you want to know from me. As for the agenda this evening, I'd like to start out with just spending a few minutes on some of the most popular VM types used in WVD deployments today that we see with customers here from Microsoft and other companies as well. Some of the storage differences between the different types of VMs as well. And of course, Ephemeral OS Disks, what you need, which VM types are supported, what to keep an eye on, some pros and cons. A short demo within the native Azure Portal as well, just to make the concept for the people who don't know it a bit more clear. Of course, the RDSH VDI use case, non-persistent, short-lived, you probably guessed that right at the beginning, will come by as well. And turning some of the cons and one in specific into a pro using Manager for WVD. And I'll end with a demo around that as well. I have enabled Q&A, so you should be able to ask questions, so I can get back to those at the end of the presentation. And then, if I don't know the answer, I'll get back to you. If it's too much to handle after the session, I'll get back to you guys as well. So first, let's talk 1 or 2 minutes about some of the most popular VM types or series used within WVD deployments. You see them on the screen as well. Reasons are, well, multiple actually. Not all of the VM series and VM types are available in each region. For example, different storage types are supported by different types of VMs and the VM series, those types of things. And there are a couple of things from a storage perspective that you need to be able to use Ephemeral OS Disks within your WVD environment, or as part of the VM, I should say. And it's also meant, sort of a background information of where Ephemeral OS Disks come from. So a D series, general use, a combination of vCPUs, memory, storage, those types of things, standard part of a VM, of course, but in a nice ratio to each other, you could say. Used for most production workloads in WVD. I see those a lot in practice as well. E-series, a high memory to vCPU ratio, core ratio, I should say, memory optimized workloads, of course. And the F-series, sort of the other way around, a high CPU to memory ratio, also referred to as optimized virtual machines. Of course, the N-series, most known or best known for the GPU capabilities, also often used within WVD environments. And B series, those are kind of special. Those are burstable machines, as I like to call them. So how that works is you can build up credits when the machines are in a sort of a steady state. They don't have too much to do. They can build up credits during lunch, during the day, during the night, evenings, you name it. And then they can burst into a vCPU capacity if that's something that the machine needs because of user demand increases, things like that. Now, B series are not that much used as host within Hostpools as part of WVD, although I've seen them come by with a couple of partners and they are successful with it. So it can certainly be done. And from a price perspective, they are interesting to have a look at. But if you're playing around with WVD within your Azure environment, for example, your private Azure environment, I mean, for example, but also in production workloads, B series work excellent as domain controllers, for example. Again, burstable. They do they get the job done. So all of these VMs support standard storage, meaning standard SSDs and standard HDDs. Not all of them support premium storage, for example, but we'll get into a bit more detail a bit later on. Here you can see, for example, that I've highlighted a D2S machine. And just so you know, if you're looking at various virtual machines, if it has an S in the name, you can be sure that premium storage is supported as well. Ultra storage, not so much, but that isn't really applicable today when talking about WVD and this specific use case. I mentioned also that not all VMs or VM series are available in every region. Came across this link, maybe you know it already, maybe not, but it's very handy. Give it a click and it will bring you to the page, well, almost immediately. And here you have an overview of all the regions available globally within the Azure Cloud, together with all the VM series, which are then available or not in the corresponding regions. And of course, there are a lot more. You can scroll to the right and see Europe pop up as well. So just handy. I thought I'd share it with you guys as well. Let me hop over back to my slides. So as for the various disk comparison options or the disk options that you have with regards to the underlying storage, as I mentioned, standard SSDs and standard HDDs are supported by just about every VM out there, but premium storage is not. So this is something to to keep an eye on always, but more specifically when it comes to ephemeral OS disks, because that's basically what these types of disks are based on. And as you can see, not much difference with regards to the maximum disk size. It's more about the throughput, the IOPS that can be generated, and so on and so forth. Now, also, you probably knew or know already beforehand of the presentation that ephemeral OS disks are free of use. They don't cost you anything. To get a better understanding of that, you probably need to know how they work underwater as well. So how can Microsoft offer you that for free? Well, they definitely can, but there's a downside to that as well, which we'll get to, of course. But here you can see, I just dug up a standard P10 managed disk, a premium SSD, and here you can see that it is around $21, $22 a month. And of course, this will differ per region. In Europe, it might be, or in the US, it might be a bit cheaper, for example, or well, whatever the case may be. Well, this is good to keep in the back of your mind because, if you are able to perhaps swap a couple of your standard machines, or VMs that are now using standard persistent OS disks instead of the Ephemeral type that we're talking about today, you exactly know, or you can calculate for yourself what you are going to save. If you open up a VM on Azure, so RDP into it, for example, open disk management, you'll find your OS disk, a data disk, which is optional, which is you see down the bottom. You can add, well, not as many as you'd like. It sort of depends on the type of VM, the series you've selected as well. I think most that you can do is around 16. I'm not 100% sure about that. But I'd like to focus a bit more, or not specifically focus, but highlight the temporary disk, which is part of just about every VM type on the Azure platform as well. Because that's also something to keep in mind when you start to work or think about ephemeral OS disks, more specifically going forward as well. But we'll get back to the temporary disk as part of your VM in combination with ephemeral OS disks at a later point. So what are ephemeral OS disks? The WVD use case, we talked about that a little bit already, but what do you need? Or better said, what are ephemeral OS disks based on? What is the technology that these disks use and need underwater? And of course, the pros and cons, what to look out for, what to take advantage of, those types of things. Well, first of all, the VM type in question for which you would like to leverage ephemeral OS disks need to support managed disks and premium storage. Premium storage we already talked about, basically. Those are the premium SSDs. Managed disks are, well, they're not new. It's sort of the default that we use nowadays when you spin up a new VM on the Azure platform. It just means that you can basically pick any type of storage, pick the disk, the size, and then most of the other configuration stuff that's needed in the background will be taken care of for you on the Azure platform. So you don't need to create a storage account, for example, first, which you would still need to do if you were using unmanaged disks. Encryption is taken care of. I think it's 5 nines availability, integration with availability, Zs and zones, and all those types of extras, you could say. It states both are needed for ephemeral OS disks. It's more like that ephemeral OS disks is based on this technology, because of course there is an overview with the exact VM series that will tell you you can use all of these machines with ephemeral disks, meaning by default they will support managed disks and premium storage. Of course, this is, like I mentioned at the beginning as well, just so you know where it comes from and sort of some background information. Right. So what are the actual ephemeral disks and where are they located? It's like this. You will have, or you have, various Azure regions, physical data centers all over the globe. In those centers are thousands of racks with physical servers, and they host your virtual machines, of course. As part of that virtual machine, if you would like to leverage Ephemeral OS disks, there needs to be premium storage and in the form of a managed disk. Now that storage as part of your VM will also have a cache, which has a certain bandwidth, if you will. It's of a certain size, I mean. And that's the part where the Ephemeral OS disk is made out of. So you have your Azure, you have your storage. As part of that storage, you have the cache. And that's what the Ephemeral OS disk is all about. So it's part of your local VM, meaning if you use it as storage, it will also be local to the VM. So sort of local storage, which means it will be faster, it will boot up faster, things like that. Also, a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, they are free to use, of course. Like I mentioned, part of the VM SSD cache, as you can see on the image as well. However, the image you would like to use, let's say Windows 10 multi-session, for example, needs to fit in the cache size of that specific VM that you've selected. So you can have a look at the various VMs that support Ephemeral OS disks. And most of those VMs will have different sizes when it comes to the Ephemeral OS disk. So meaning the underlying cache where the Ephemeral disk is made out of, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does, of course. It works with all types of images, even the shared image gallery you can work with, for example. And of course, like I mentioned, lower latency. There's nothing that needs to be mounted or anything. It's all local traffic, if you will. So a bit faster than, blob storage, for example. And again, with regards to the Windows 10 image as an example, if you then have a cache, so an Ephemeral OS disk of 100 gigabytes, and you would like to place a Windows 10 multi-session image on there from the Azure Marketplace, for example, the ready-made images, those are around, I believe, 127 or 128 gigabytes, then it won't fit. Meaning when you would try to select on the native Azure portal as well, and the same applies to Manager for WVD as well, the option to use an Ephemeral OS disk together with that VM type, even though it is supported, will simply be grayed out. And that's something I'll quickly show you as well to make the concept even a bit more clear, hopefully. Okay, so not available for all VM types. We had that out of the way before already. The second one, kind of a big one as well, or perhaps even the biggest one, they cannot be stopped or deallocated. So that means if you spin up an Azure VM as part of the or through the Azure portal using an Ephemeral OS disk, it will always run. You can log into it, RDP into it. Your users can use it as an RDSH host, for example. Multiple users can work on it. They can log off. They can shut down. You can shut it down yourself, being the admin. But if you go into the portal, you will always see it running. Meaning, like I mentioned, the storage will be free to use, but the machine will always be running. It cannot be set in a stop deallocated state, meaning you stop paying for the compute resources as well. So that's sort of a bit tricky, something you need to be aware of. Now, and this is something more specific that we can help with, we being Manager for WVD or Nerdio, of course, and I'd like to demo that near the end of the presentation as well. It's a pretty cool demo, if I say so myself. Dependent on cache size, so again, the image you would like to use on the VM needs to fit the cache size as part of the Ephemeral OS disk, or it is the Ephemeral OS disk, in fact. And a couple of features not supported. But I also have a slide near the end, which is meant as a reference, of course, also with all of the links I've used to get information for myself throughout the last couple of weeks, months, and before that as well. So you can reference everything I'm mentioning throughout the presentation, go to the overviews with which VM types are supported, which are not, things to look out for, not supported features. There are a bit more than this, of course, but just so you know. So you would like to take advantage of local to VM. So no mounting needed, faster provisioning, faster start and stop times. And as you can see on the second bullet, under the second bullet, the most popular VMs that we or that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, so the D, E, F series and so on, are supported to be used with Ephemeral OS disks as well. So that's good news, of course. Perfect fit for Manager for WVD. We'll get to that. Cost savings. They are free. We mentioned that a couple of times also. And with regards to local to the VM, the speed differences between normal persistent OS disks and the Ephemeral OS Disks. Misha Wetz wrote a nice article about that, going into some of the speed differences, a couple of other things as well, some of which I'm mentioning tonight as well, of course. Go have a look at his website, more interesting stuff to find on there as well, of course. Might be helpful. So again, this slide is more meant as a reference, not meant to go over step by step, bullet by bullet, field by field during the presentation. But as you can see, it's sort of meant as a cheat sheet, if you will. The VM size is reported, handy to have by, or handy to have handy. Disk type support in all regions. Ephemeral OS disks are available, so at least some types of the machines are available in each regions, just not all of the types in all regions, would be my guess. Persistence, OS disk resize during creation only, and so on and so forth. Right, so let's hop over to the Azure Portal, because this is something I would like to show you guys real quickly. If you provision a VM, virtual machine, and I'm not going to fill in all the fields, of course, I just want to show the differences quickly, which will fit and do not fit with regards to the various VM types and the sizes of the ephemeral underlying OS disk. So let's say Northern Europe, all fine. Here you see in Ubuntu. Linux is supported by ephemeral OS disks as well, and it actually makes a good example, because if I select a standard D2S v3, it's a relatively small and cheap machine. If I go over to disks, and remember I have Ubuntu selected, which is a pretty small image, you can see that image will fit the cache size of the storage associated to that VM. So I'm able to select ephemeral OS disk, use it here, and you see this grayed out almost immediately. Now, if I go back, and if I would make this, let's say 2019, because of a hosted shared environment or something like that, if I would go over to that screen again, you can now see it's grayed out because that image will not fit in the same cache size as Ubuntu did. However, if I then would select another machine, and this is, let me see, a D8 series, a bit tougher, that will fit, because I believe that cache size is up to 200. And again, that's all documented by Microsoft, of course, as well. And I've referenced a couple of those links in one of those slides as well. So here you can see what I meant with that the VM image needs to fit the size of the ephemeral OS disk, meaning the underlying cache, which is it is made out of. Right. So this is what I mentioned near the beginning. So the temp disk comes back into play here. This is a preview feature. It has been in preview for, I think, 6 or 7 months already. But with this, you will be able, or you are able, but it's still in preview, so no SLA, no support, things like that. You are able to turn the temporary disk or use that storage as an ephemeral OS disk. So you might have certain VM types which do not have a cache size big enough to hold the image you would like to use in production, testing, whatever the case may be. And then you might be able to use the temp disk instead. But again, this is in preview. Give it a Google, and again, it's referenced throughout the links as well. Just not all information that I reference is a direct link. Sometimes you have to click a bit through, of course, but I'm sure you will be able to get to all the information that you would like to get to. So the use case, this is what we've referenced a couple of times also. WVD host, meaning RDSH, multi-user and multi-session, whatever we would like to call it. It all means the same thing in the end, of course. As long as you have a good foundation, meaning a solid image, and of course a solid image management solution around that as well, which definitely helps if you need to update, if you need to patch, and so on and so forth, which can be quite cumbersome within WVD environments today. And of course, VDI type solutions are also supported, just as is Linux, as I mentioned as well, which doesn't apply to WVD, but it's definitely worth a mention, of course. Okay, so it starts with an Azure region. This is sort of a resume of some of the slides that we've gone through or gone over throughout the last 10 minutes or so. There you will find certain VM types, VM type series, and those will have certain storage options. And of course, you can reference some of the documentation to find the supported VMs directly as well, with regards to support for ephemeral OS disks. If the right type of storage is supported, you will be able to use ephemeral OS disks, and of course then keep an eye on the cache size and the temporary disk size, which is still in preview, so do not use that for production purposes. However, what I'm going to show you now is very suitable for production purposes, and we have multiple customers, dozens even, which already leverage for over a year Ephemeral OS disks. This is the part where I would like to show you more specifically the con, where the machines cannot be deallocated, not be stopped, meaning you have to throw them away completely, remove them from the Azure platform to stop paying for compute resources. And that's something together with the auto-scaling mechanism built into a manager for WVD that we can take care of, or at least we can come real close. It will involve host pool sizing. You can see, well, the storage. There is no storage cost, of course. Scaling logic, but of course, I would like to show you guys that in practice as well. Let me hop over to Manager for WVD. I'm not going to go over what this all is. Well, these are host pools. You probably figured it out yourself as well. I'm just going to focus on getting a dynamic host pool up and running. We have static and dynamic. Static is adding in machines manually, and dynamic, we can make use of the underlying autoscale engine, or one of the autoscale engines that we have built in. Let's call this ephemeral. Work with the description, and of course you would need to choose your desktop experience, meaning a host shared desktop experience, like is selected at the top as well, or published applications, for example, a VDI type solution in the form of non-persistent desktops, or personal assigned desktops, which is not a good use case, of course, in this case, when you would like to use non-persistent storage in the form of ephemeral OS disks. This is a cool one and an important one as well. The name prefix is used by the Autoscale engine to give all of your machines a unique name. It will add machines, remove machines, build them from scratch completely, and so on and so forth, but we'll get to that in a bit more detail in just a minute. But when it does that, when it adds machines because of user demand that increases, it will use your name prefix, and it will generate an alphanumeric string, append that to the name prefix, so your machines will always have a unique name. And best thing is, it will also be able to reuse that name, meaning user demand increases, a machine is added, gets a unique name, user demand decreases, machine is deleted, completely removed, destroyed, whatever you would like to call it. A couple of hours later, a day later, a week later, user demand goes up again, one or multiple machines are added, and they will be able to reuse the same names as before. So lots of advantages with regards to GPOs and whitelisting and certificates, or whatever you can think of, basically. You need to select an image. I'm not going to go into this, of course, as part of this demo. I'll just select the one I have been referencing throughout the session. And here, it's sort of the same thing. You need to select your VM size and OS disk that goes with the various VM sizes. And this is sort of the same thing as I did on within the Azure Portal as well. So D2 is selected. This is the one I started out on the Azure Portal as well with. I believe, not 100% sure. But here we do not have a valid ephemeral OS disk option, as you can see. If I switch over to the D4S machine, we have an ephemeral OS disk available, but just as with the Azure Portal, it's grayed out because the Windows 10 multi-session image that I've selected here doesn't fit the disk. So take it one step further, just like before, the D8 machine, which will have a 200 gigabyte machine, and again, then it is selectable, of course. Here you can assign users. I always do that afterwards, so I have a better overview. But this is part of creating a dynamic host pool. That's all you need to do. And as you've noticed, I didn't have to fill in how many machines I would like to have part of this host pool, because that's something configured on the Autoscale page, which is loading now. Just taking a sip of water in between. 10 to 12 seconds normally, there we go. So auto-scaling, you can see it is disabled by default, enable it with the flip of a switch. And here you can see the information on the left that we just filled in, that we just selected, and we talked about the reused host names together with the name prefix as well. As you can see, you can disable it also. And we also keep an eye on, and of course this all applies with normal stateful or other types of stateless machines as well, not using an ephemeral OS disk. We keep an eye on your minimum and maximum spend with regards to your VM compute and storage costs that are based on everything that you fill in here and select here, of course. So if I would not select an ephemeral OS disk, but just a stateful OS disk, another type, you will see storage costs pop up here. Now, of course, your actual costs will always be somewhere in between or near the maximum, but not always the maximum, of course, because they won't be running 24/7. That's also why we use autoscaling as an example, but at least you know what your minimum and maximums will be. And we have a lot more on the costing part, but I'm not going to talk about that today, of course. So let's have a look at the host pool sizing. This is sort of interesting. So normally we would be able to say, well, okay, I would like to have 2, 3, 5, 50, whatever you would like to fill in. Let's say 3 or 4 machines as my base host pool capacity, meaning there will always be 3 or 4 machines part of this host pool. They will be in a deallocated state, they will be in a shutdown state, not completely deallocated. They will be deallocated, sorry. So you won't pay for compute, you only pay for the underlying storage. And then below that, you would be able to say, one of those machines I would like to have in a booted state, ready to go at all times, for the user experience, users logging in after hours, in the weekends, all those types of things. But because these are machines with an ephemeral OS disk, they cannot be turned off, they cannot be deallocated. So that's why this number will always be equal to each other. Now, these machines will always be booted. So if we set it to 1, and this is something that we see in practice a lot as well, a lot of companies always leave 1 or 2 machines running, like I mentioned, for people working outside of office hours, because if more machines need to be added, if more machines need to be booted, which is not capable or not possible in this specific case, of course, because they cannot be shut down. But in this case, we could say, I would like to add 1 or multiple machines when the user demand increases and this one single machine is not able to keep up. So here we can then say that the autoscaling engine is allowed to add in 1 or multiple machines, 1 at a time, multiple at a time, bringing me to the scaling logic in just a minute, of course, on top of the base host pool capacity. As you can see, extra hosts. So this will always be running, and when user demand increases, that single machine is not enough anymore. It's able to build 2 or multiple machines on top of that for additional load handling. Now, the scaling logic before these machines will be built from scratch and added on top of the base host pool capacity needs to be based on something, of course. So here we can work with CPU usage, average active sessions, and available sessions. And by the way, I almost forgot to mention it. You also see these exclamation marks throughout the whole solution. It will tell you exactly what it is, what you're doing, working on, where you can go to for additional information, those types of things. But here you can see we're also working on RAM usage being added as a trigger as well. But let's take CPU usage as an example. So here we can say 1 or multiple machines can be added if the CPU utilization exceeds 65% for 5 minutes or longer. And we can do the same thing with scaling in 1 machine or more when it drops below 40% for 5 minutes, 15, or a bit longer even. Now, when doing this in a hosted shared environment, multiple people will be working on the same machines, on the same hosts. So we can also work around that to not bother them that much during work hours, for example. So here we can say, let's pick 6 p.m. until 8 in the morning, which is a good time to start at the office, I think. So, and now we tell the engine basically that it is only allowed between these hours to shut down, completely remove these machines that it might have added before. That also means vice versa, that during the other hours, meaning work hours, it won't touch the machines. It will build new machines additionally, as long as it doesn't go above 2 additional of the one based on top of the base host pool capacity, but it will not scale them in, shut them down, throw them away. It will only do that as of 6 p.m. in the afternoon until 8 a.m. In the morning, depending on your time zone, of course. Always keep an eye on that. This is really helpful, but we combine it with, to make it a bit more detailed, with scaling aggressiveness. Set that to high, medium, or low. And I'll tell you what that means, of course. But again, if you forget about it, just click it and it will tell you exactly what it is. If you set it to high and the autoscale engine is allowed to shut down machines to remove those machines, which it might have added throughout the day, it will first put the machines in drain mode. Excuse me. It will then look for machines that are already empty, and then it will look for the machines with the least amount or number of active sessions, and it will follow that route. Once it starts to shut down or scale in machines, I should say, with active sessions, users will first be notified, and of course this can be filled in freely. And then 10 minutes after that, or 15, 30, whatever you would like to configure, that machine is actually scaled in, removed, deallocated, and you won't pay for it anymore. Not at all, because compute doesn't apply anymore. If you set it to medium, sort of the same thing. Drain mode, empty machines first, but then after that, in medium, it will only look for machines with disconnected sessions, and it will leave all of the machines with active sessions alone. Then we have low, you probably guessed it already, drain mode, and it will look for empty machines alone, and will leave all of the other types of machines alone. So this is how you can take care of, well, user experience with having one or multiple machines up and running, but also cost optimization. With regards to only having one machine running and letting the Autoscale engine build new machines and remove machines on top of that. Now you might be wondering, can we set this to 0 as well? Well, of course you can. And what you would do then is we would use pre-stage hosting, for example. So let's say from Monday till Friday. You can go with whatever works for you, of course. And 8 a.m. I've selected that here as well. You can say, well, start at least one machine at 8 a.m. And then it is allowed to build at least one machine as part of these two machines on top. And if you do it like this and you want to have the same number of machines as in the previous example, you set this to 3 and you will have a 3 machine max as part of this host pool as well. So there are multiple ways that you can take care of this. One final thing, and that's sort of ending the presentation as well. As you might know or might be aware of, the WVD agent can give back certain statuses. And here we like to focus on the negative ones in this case. So for example, no heartbeat, but you can add in as many as you would like, together with has no active sessions, has no sessions, or even has active sessions. And then you can tell it what to do. So restart that machine a couple of times, wait so many minutes in between, or actually remove or leave as is, recreate the machine altogether, which will probably solve your issue. Doesn't mean that people won't be calling the help desk, for example, but at least in the meantime, your issue will be resolved fully automated. Let me set this back to 1, this one back to 2. And now we're still configuring a dynamic host pool based on Ephemeral OS Disks. And if I forgot about something or did something wrong, it should tell me when I click save. And otherwise, we should end up in the previous page. And then we should see the Autoscale engine kick in and starting to build those machines. And hopefully it will do so. Well, let's get back to that in just 1 or 2 minutes, see if it worked. Let's get back to, no, that's not the one I wanted. Back to the presentation. So like I mentioned, that is what I wanted to share with you guys today with regards to what Ephemeral OS Disks are, how they work, how Manager for WVD can help, of course. You can give it a go for yourself if you would like to try the community edition. And I think it's known by the most of you. And otherwise, give it a Google Nerdio Community Edition. You will find a blog post telling you exactly where to go, what you need to do, and of course you can ask me all the questions that you have as well. Perhaps even join our Slack channel or meetup if you haven't done so already to ask questions and perhaps help others out as well. And like I mentioned, this is for reference only. So after the presentation, I'll make sure to send it to you guys. Perhaps through Meetup, I think I will be able to select only the participants of this specific session. Need to look into that, but I think I can. So now I will have a look at some of the questions that you guys might have. Give me a second. And of course, thank you very much for attending and joining. Hopefully you found it informative.